Frank Peter, thanks very much for taking the time to speak with us. I just wanted to say on behalf of all of the audiences here, and also on behalf of some of the BSO musicians I've talked to recently, we're all very much looking forward to having you back with us. You're a great favorite in Boston, and our musicians and our audiences enjoy your playing very, very much.
Yeah. Well, it's on both sides. I also always enjoy coming to Boston, especially to Boston. It's a very, very special place to me all the time.
Well, listen, this particular concert should be very interesting. You're playing a work by the great composer Martinu, who has a long association with the Boston Symphony.
Yes.
But it's not a concerto that one hears very often, and so I wondered if we could just start off by talking a little bit about that piece.
Yes.
Can you tell us about the Martinu Second Violin Concerto, which you'll be playing with us and with Christoph von Dohnányi here?
Yeah. Well, the piece was commissioned, as you said, by the Boston Symphony Orchestra in 1942, together with the great Russian violinist Misha Elman. And the story is that Elman had heard the first symphony by Martinu played by the Boston Symphony, the premiere actually of the first symphony, and he was so impressed, he immediately asked the composer to write a violin concerto for him. So Martinu said, okay, let's meet, and you play something for me. That happened. I think Elman played like 1 or 2 hours for him, and then all of a sudden Martinu just walked out without saying anything and vanished and disappeared. And Elman didn't hear from him, I think, at least 2 months or 3 months, and thought, oh my God, maybe I played so bad or something happened or he wasn't happy with me. But then after 3 months, somebody rang at his door, and at Elman's door, and it was Martinu with a finished score, everything, saying, voila, this is your violin concerto. And the premiere was, I think, in January 1944. And I don't know if the orchestra since then has played it again. I have not asked anybody.
I don't actually, I have to admit, I don't know the performance history of the piece here more recently, but we'll find out. Certainly it hasn't been played in recent memory.
Yes.
But this is such a remarkable story, this meeting with Misha Elman and Martinu.
Yeah, I think that Martinu was really aware that Misha Elman was kind of a very conventional thinking violinist. I don't think that Misha Elman would have ever liked to play, for example, the Schönberg or the Berg concerto, so he knew that he has to write Elman something very, in the style of, kind of Dvorak, Tchaikovsky, but with a modern language, of course.
Right.
And for me, I have just performed the concerto starting in May. I have not played it, didn't play it before. I learned it just for this year, because it's the 50th year of death of Martinu. He died in 1959. I more and more find out playing it that it is so much related to the Dvorak violin concerto in so many senses. That's
very interesting. In what sense is it a sort of certain?
Just the way of how the violin is the violin part is written. It is so natural. Martinu himself was a very good violinist. I think he even, like Dvorak, played for a couple of years as a member of the Czech Philharmonic. He was the second violin player in the Czech Philharmonic in the, I think, early 20s. And later, when he decided to be a full-time composer, he left the orchestra to study in Paris. But he knew very well about the violin, and everything is really thought out of. You can feel he was a violinist. Like, for example, the same is with Hindemith. But even more natural, I find, than Hindemith, because Martinu, as all the Slavonic composers, they have a very natural way of using the sound of the violin, the technique. And there are so many spots that remind me of the famous older brother of the Dvorak A minor violin concerto. For example, the beginning of the violin part with its 2 big cadenzas as the same in the Dvorak, and also some very, very similar dance-like passages in the first movement and also in the last movement. And first you think, oh my God, this is very tricky and very complicated, but after a while you feel that it's just so much thought out of the soul of violin playing.
Well, I'm looking forward very much to hearing you play it. I wanted to also talk to you and ask you about some other projects that you've done recently. Speaking of the Martinu concertos, we just were You've been a champion of some other concerti, sort of from the middle of the previous century, the 20th century, that aren't necessarily performed that often, including most recently, I think there was a Szymanowski recording, a Britten Szymanowski concerti, which was released just this past year. Can you talk about that project a little bit?
Yeah, well, I was deeply in love with Szymanowski's music since I was a teenager. I remember my first teacher, my Russian professor, Valery Gradov, he gave me the three meets by Szymanowski for violin and piano to learn when I was like 12 years old. And since that time, I always was very much in love with the language, musical language of Szymanowski. His songs and his piano pieces, and then his famous opera, King Roger, and all this is like such a great, intense and solid music. For me, actually, I must put him next to Bartók. I don't know if everybody agrees, but I find him so fulfilling and so, just like a rock, solid the music. And it takes really a long time to find the colors and, every note has something behind to think. I mean, let's say that the Britten Concerto, which I recorded on the same disc, is you have to approach in a completely different way. It is so well written and it's so virtuoso, but the Szymanowski, especially the first violin concerto, there are so many thoughts behind every note, and it's always such an adventure, even if I've played it now many times, but after a couple of years coming back and playing it again, it's really fulfilling. So this was a big project I did like 2-3 years ago, and I decided to do it in Warsaw with the local orchestra there. Of course, they have a very, very long Szymanowski tradition and a wonderful hall, so I went there and really enjoyed a lot to do it. I hope that one day I also come to play the Szymanowski, or one of the Szymanowskis in Boston.
Well,